So good afternoon all. We are into the second session of our FDP on sensor data analytics, and we have Dr. Arun Rajkumar as our resource person for the second session. So let's have a brief introduction about the resource person. Dr. Arun Rajkumar is working as a teaching faculty in the Department of Computer Science at NIT Calicut. He received BE degree in computer engineering from Malavya NIT Jaipur, received MTech in computer science and engineering from NIT Tiruchirappalli, completed his PhD in computer science and engineering in network security domain at NIT Tiruchirappalli. He has more than 16 years of teaching and research experience. His research interests include networks, privacy, security, machine learning algorithms. He has research articles published in referred Sky indexed journals and IEEE ACM conferences. He is an invited reviewer of Sky indexed journals, IEEE conferences, and sponsored research projects. He completed 2 projects funded from the DSTE and SERP under the Core Research Grant Scheme by Government of India. He has completed a funded project received as a faculty research grant from MHRD, Government of India. In January 2020, he visited industries and universities in and around Tokyo, Japan for the research collaboration sponsored by JST and TechCube3. He is IEEE senior member, ACM member, and a life member of Indian Society of Technical Education. With great enthusiasm, we are privileged to welcome Dr. Arun Rajkumar P. to the FDP on sensor data analytics organized by IIIT Kottayam. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sabin, for the formal introduction. So good morning to everyone. So I'll be taking a topic on sensors and protocol layers. So, this is the outline of my talk. So first, I'll be giving an overview on the introduction to the sensors. What are the types of sensors? What are the features? And I'm focusing on one particular sensor, how it can be used practically for the experiments and other purposes. And second topic is on the sensors and protocol layers. So what are the protocol stack that we follow, especially when we wanted to have a sensor communication, right? A communication between the sensor devices. So that's the second topic. And what are the scenarios and use cases of applying these sensors? And what exactly are the challenges involved in sensor communication? And the summary of the talk. So this is the outline. So for the introduction, so we know we are living in the world of sensors, right? So we can find different types of sensors either in our day-to-day life, from our home, offices, and even in cars, we are finding out some sensors, right? So all these sensors are making our lives easier, right? So it makes completely easier. So if you see, so you can see there is a diagram here. So people are washing the clothes. So, but now we can see we are having a washing machine to wash the clothes. So all the the number of sensors that are available in this washing machine is extremely more than what has been available in the day-to-day life. So here, if you see, the number of sensors are more than 10, which is used in the high-end washing machines. Like we have a temperature sensor, we have a rotor position sensor, we have dirt sensor, photoelectric, pressure, vibration, proximity, humidity, like many types of sensors are there we have. So especially inside this washing machine, right? So what is visible from transition from like this day-to-day life and how we have moved into this modern day life, right? So all this and many other, not only in this application, so many other automation tasks are possible because of the sensors. So if you say something is automated, the automation happens, it's because of the sensors. right? So how accurate the sensors is the one challenge, and how efficiently and how we can rely on the results produced by the sensors, it's another challenge. So different challenges exist even though the sensors are available, but these sensors are completely turning the lives to an automated world, right? So we actually, we wanted to say, we could say we are living in the world of sensors. So one more diagram. So can anyone guess like how many sensors are there in the aircraft? And just type in the chat box, or they can turn on the mics. They have an option. Okay, is it a one way, like there won't be any response coming back from the participants? So can anyone predict like how many sensors will be used in this aircraft? Just a count, they can just guess. There's a chat. Okay, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so there seems to be some count coming out. Right, but you can see there are thousands of sensors are especially built inside this engines. We call it as Rolls-Royce engines. So Rolls-Royce cars you've heard of, but Rolls-Royce company, they are very good. They are manufacturers for this aircraft engines. So this engines and the complete aircraft, if you see, it consists of almost thousands of sensors. And like tachometers, engine temperature gauges, fuel and oil quantity, pressure, altimeters, airspeed, vertical speed. So different types of sensors and radars are available in this aircraft. So this is one advancement. Like there are many number of sensors that are available in this aircraft. The important point is like these sensors should collect the data and appropriately transmit the information. From the data, the information must be extracted and must be transmitted to the cockpit available in the aircraft to take an appropriate decision, right? Because the pilots have to take a proper action and precaution to prevent any kind of a disaster or accident. So in that case, the control sensors that are available in this aircraft must supply additional signals to the cockpit indicators. This is one example where we could see the sensors availability, right? So moving on next here. Okay, so can anyone say what is this? Last week there was a news regarding with respect to this. Anyone else have an idea? I can just tell the name at least. Any guesses? You can put it in the chat box. Satellite, okay, good. Okay, so this is actually, okay, let me just. This is actually a spacecraft named DART. There is a scribbling issue. 1 second. Yeah, so this is the name of the spacecraft, which is DART, we call it. So this spacecraft was developed by the NASA, right? And they were developed to they were designed to hit an asteroid, which is actually not a threat to the Earth, but they are designed to hit an asteroid. So last week you would have seen in the news, the spacecraft is now flying and around the Earth's orbit, and it is going to hit the asteroid next year, right? So if you see that this type of spacecrafts, generally you can find there is a blue color symbol here. So this type of blue color symbol is actually, we call it as a sun sensor. So sensors, we are also using it here. It's not only sun sensor, there are many sensors used in this spacecraft because it's automated completely. So one particular example we can see here is this sun sensor, which is placed on top of the chamber, the spacecraft chamber. So it is actually a slit, right? This is actually a slit actually. So here there is a sun sensor, and here also you can see there is a sun sensor, right? And these sun sensors are kept to determine the position of sun, because when the spacecraft is revolving around the Earth's orbit, so it must be knowing where's the direction, the sun's direction must be known. For that reason, they arrange these two sun sensors perpendicular to each other. You can see it is arranged in perpendicular way so that they can easily determine the direction of the sun. So what is exactly available in the sensor is the photoelectric cells, right? So there are cells that is available here. So whenever there is a light that falls on the cells, then a voltage is induced. So based on that voltage, then they predict that the direction of the sun, because these two sensors are perpendicular to each other. So this spacecraft is designed to hit the asteroid to check whether the asteroid course of movement is changed from the orbit that is rightly moving it. So if it is successful, then definitely in future, if any such asteroids are coming forward, then this type of spacecraft will be used for hitting that asteroid, especially to move from the Earth's orbit, right? So these are the availability of sensors that in different fields, from our day-to-day life till to the electronic appliances, to the transport vehicles, and even to for the exoplanetary missions. So for interplanetary missions also, we're using this type of sensors. Okay, so what are the different types of sensors? So there are two types. One is digital and other one is analog. So digital sensors, they detect the variable status, right? So whether it's functioning or not. But again, in the digital sensor, we have analog to digital converter, which converts the analog to digital values. And okay, so there is an analog sensor, so which measures the continuous variables. So you can see the sensors that play a vital role in healthcare, aviation, textile, marine, automotive, and many other industries. So it enables us to keep an eye on our environment for early signs of any natural disaster, right? So it reads the input parameters and detects the environment change and sends the input to the computer or controller for decision making. So this is the different types of sensors that we have. Let's look in detail, like what are the different sensors. So one is temperature sensor, so which is so famous, especially in the weather prediction and especially on the temperature monitoring. So this type of sensors are available in washing machines everywhere. Sensors are available, right? So they measure the changes in temperature. That's what it means by temperature sensor. Proximity, and then the number. I mean, this is the number of LM35, which is linear monolithic, which is the type of sensor, temperature sensor that's available in the market. So they ask for the model, we can ask for LM35 sensor, so which we can purchase. And proximity sensor is a sensor that can detect the nearby objects without making any contact. So this type of sensors is especially useful in medical field, where we don't want to touch the patients, but still we wanted to sense what is the temperature of the patient or whatever it is. So it detects by emitting the electromagnetic field, right, and monitors the change in the field. So that's how the proximity sensors work. Then we have accelerometer. So especially it is used in the vehicles to test the speed, to calculate this, to compute the speed of the vehicles. So this is actually we call it as the accelerometer sensors. Then we have geopositioning satellite, which is referred as the GPS. It's actually global positioning satellite. So geographic location, that's why we have put geo. So the global positioning satellite is what GPS, where we can determine the location of a user. So if you're having the phones, then the GPS receiver is inbuilt and we can easily find the location of a particular user. So if you're tracking some cars or the flights or the particular vehicle, then it's easy to use this type of GPS sensors. Then ultrasonic sensors. So ultrasonic is that sound waves. So generally it emits the sound waves. For that we use this ultrasonic. Then smoke, gas, alcohol. So even for detecting the presence of smoke, we have a sensor for gas and for alcohol. And for motion sensors, there are two types of motion sensors, which is active and passive, we can call it. So active sensors, so active sensors generally it emits ultrasonic waves. This is something like active. So which emit electrosonic sound waves continuously. This will emit continuously. And if there is any disruption to the waves, it triggers a signal that generates an output. So example, like if you can just sound an alarm in opening a door, right? And infrared, which we are already familiar with, like for detecting the presence of humans or animals, right? So heat energy, which generally we try to detect from this. So this is something like a passive sensor. This is infrared, and this ultrasonic is the active sensor. Okay, then comes the humidity sensor. So especially we wanted to monitor the water vapor in the air. Right? So generally for water vapor in the air, we use this humidity sensors. And oxygen sensors. So there are sensors that detects the oxygen O2 level. So the presence of oxygen, especially when you're using the ventilators and all, we can just check the oxygen levels, especially in the medical field. So that's one of the usage of these oxygen sensors. Next slide. Yeah. So next comes the wearable sensors. So where we used to wear it in a clothes, wristwatch, gadget. Nowadays, most of the patients they are trying to wear as a watch, as a wristwatch to monitor their blood pressure, temperature, glucose level, heartbeat rate, and all those things just by wearing this wristwatch. So these sensors of very minute technologies they made of. So these sensors are generally sense the uh, pulses and then they transmit the data to the nearby access point, right? So these are all one type of wearable type of sensors. Then we have pressure sensors, especially in the tire pressure monitoring system. For vehicles, we can see this pressure of liquids and gases. So generally, they are small electronic devices that measure the air pressure in the tires, right? So what happens is like it gives you the early low tire warning system. I mean, low tire warning message by transmitting the information to a vehicle's onboard computer (OBU), right? So generally displays the readings in PSI, per scale inch. We call it as PSI, per scale inch. It generally displays. So then we have a camera sensor. So camera sensor is also device generally to monitor, especially in the deaf regions, and also it's used as a surveillance, right? But one more thing that we have to, there are some privacy and security risks involved in this camera sensors. So that needs to be verified when we're using it. And the drone, which is this air pressure sensors, right? So they actually stabilize the altitude, right? This air pressure sensor, they stabilize the altitude and allows the drone to hover for photography or for videography for any purposes. For that reason also we use this type of air pressure sensors. So it basically stabilizes the altitude that we have. Then we have vibration sensors. So generally we use the piezoelectric effect for the vibration sensors. And LIDAR, which is light, emits the light waves. And we also have magnetic sensor, so which is detects the geomagnetism, right? And the magnitude of the magnetism of a current or magnet. So this type of magnetic sensor is a little easier. Just we need to have a magnet, and then we need to wrap around a wire on top of it, right? So just a wire that is wrapped around the a magnet will create a simple magnetic sensor. Okay, so when a ferrous object, something it approaches over this type of sensor, then you can see the magnetic flux in the wire or the coil changes and produces a voltage. Right, so that's how simply a magnetic sensor can be built. Right, so that is one example. Then heat. So heat sensors, so generally to present temperature, like how whether we have a high temperature or not. For that, we actually use this heat sensor. Then radar. So this gives precise measurement of objects over a vast distance. I mean, even in the extreme environments. So these type of radar sensors are more common in the automotive, especially in the vehicles, right? So where we are talking about the aircrafts. So there, this type of radar sensors will be very useful, right? And also for the security applications. All right, so let's see how this sensors. Yeah, so let's see how the sensors are produced in the bulk, especially in the from the market production perspective. Because now, if you see, for the past 25 years, the sensor prices have been completely declined for the past 20 years. Now it just so becomes cheaper, smaller, and even smarter, right? Where we can have an interface directly connected to the internet and can be accessed anywhere. So those are the pros and advantages for the sensors. And from the production point of view, so all these tasks which I've mentioned point by point, so everything is automated. So industrial pressure sensor, so how generally they this type of sensors are built. So this is an example we can see. So this knob, everything will not be there, only the bottom layer will be there. So they screw that into measuring point at the process connection. So for that also there is a machine to do it. So just need to place it over there and they'll just screw that. And what happens after that? It converts the present pressure to an electrical signal. So on top of it, inside that you can see there will be a sensor. I have the projection over here. So there will be a sensor which converts the present pressure to an electrical signal. Then there will be a board with all the pins connected. So that type of electronics amplifies and standardizes the signal. So the standardized signal will be transmitted to the signal evaluation through the wire. So there will be wire that is connected over there. After that, then this knob will be closed. So this is actually the case to protect against the environmental impacts. So before this knob is placed, all the steps are completely done. And for that, there is no intervention for any of the human being. And all the different steps is done by the machines in the industry. So this is something industry production where the bulk product produce something around thousands of sensors in just a half day. Because of the requirement, the market production is also a little high for these sensors. So sensors design and deployment. So generally these sensors are placed inside the machine or engine. So we have to monitor the internal condition as well as the external environment condition. So both has to be modified. Both has to be monitored. And it is designed with high reliability. So reliability is a very important factor because nowadays we are getting so cheap sensors, but we cannot have results reliable on that. So naturally, we have to buy something more costly. So that we have already experienced when we are using it in the labs. So when we did some projects using some cheap sensors, and the reliability or the accuracy that we obtained was slightly different from the expensive one. So it will actually drastically affect the results that we produce. So in that case, these sensors must be designed with high reliability and meets the standards set by the industry. There could be different industry. Aviation is one example. So for many critical infrastructure industries or for many industries concerned, there are some specific standards. So all these standards must be set. Be set by the appropriate industry, and it should be met out by the sensor design. So any manufacturer they develop these sensors must stick to the standards. So let's take an example. What are the modules that are involved in the aviation industry? So especially in the sensor design perspective, because when you see the sensors, there are different modules involved. I've just covered only the important models, but in addition to that, there are also many modules when we consider the aircraft system alone. So there is a communication module. So what happens in the communication module here is it connects the flight deck to the ground. So, right, because, and also the passengers on board. So both the type of communication should happen from the flight to the ground, as well as in the flight with the passengers on board also there should be some communication. So for achieving that communication, we cannot depend on the lower frequency radio band. So obviously we require a very high frequency radio band, generally for the line of sight communication, right? Such as aircraft to aircraft control or aircraft to air traffic control, which is ground, right? So that's why they avoid the collision when the two aircrafts are flying on the same direction also. Right? So that type of higher communication, a very high frequency radio band is required for such type of communication model. And in the navigation model, we determine the position and direction, right? So both the position and direction on or above the surface of Earth, right? When it is flying, especially in the aircraft system, we need to determine that. So what they generally use is this avionics. They use the satellite-based, right? Satellite-based, ground-based, and other systems. They not only depend only on the satellites, they also depend on the ground-based, because they cannot rely only on the satellite-based systems. So they use a hybrid satellite-based and the ground-based systems before taking any decisions, right? So all this it is helped by sensors. For communication, there are sensors inside. For navigation, there are sensors inside. For each and every model, there are sensors which is providing the inputs for the efficient decision making. So navigation systems, they calculate the position automatically and display to the flight queue and moving map. This moving map is also displayed to the crew. Right? So this happens in navigation model. So in traffic control, we know, so because the traffic control is automatic traffic control, especially the aircraft. So where we have to have sufficient space between two or more aircraft, whether you are moving horizontally or vertically, so that to avoid the collisions, right? And these controllers will help to coordinate the positions, right, which is reported by the pilots, right? So and for that, we also use the radars, where they are used to check the positions of aircraft. And also we take the help from the ground stations, central towers or control towers, right? So which enable this automatic traffic control. So that's why we, especially when during the bad weather, we'll just leave it to the automated system to take care of autopilot turned on to take care of landing it on the appropriate location. And weather. So weather is also important part. So again, we have another model called weather. Then auto control, then flight recorder. So flight recorder, which we have is a black box, right? Black box recorders. And for this black box recorders, our Indian company, Comolin. So Comolin is an Indian firm. They are the one who manufactures the black box recorders. So which is very famous. So just especially because even the aircraft is met with an accident or disaster, something happened, then we can just take the last minute communication happen between the pilot and everything from the black box recorders, which is manufactured by the Comolin. Especially for domestic airlines, this Comolin is the Indian firm, generally manufactures it. Okay, so let's see what are the sensors that we are using it in our project lab, especially from the project perspective. So this one sensor, so this picture was taken from our lab. So it's our component. So these components are purchased from the SCRB project, funded project. So this one component which we purchased is GPS sensor. So GPS, it got two, this is a sensor actually, this is a sensor, and this is a receiver. And you can see this GPS have got two interfaces. One is TTL and other one is the RS-232. So RS-232 interface. So TTL, we know it is a transistor to transistor logic. And RS is the serial interface, which means recommendation standard. That RS stands for recommendation standard. So it's a serial interface here. Then another sensor that we use it in our lab is wireless camera. So here this camera rotates on all the 4 directions, and this can be controlled by our smartphone. So I just place it over the lab, and then I can access from my hometown or from my place or from the quarters area. So I can just keep monitoring it. I can also turn the direction from here. So all that is possible. The only thing is it requires an external power supply. So the power supply is important here, whereas the connection is wireless. So if we wanted to have a continuous data coming from here, so 2 things are important. One is the access point from where this camera is connected must be turned on always, and there must be a direct power supply to this. These 2 are satisfied with our available UPS supply 24 hours. Then we can monitor 24/7, and all the data can be collected. So recently, we are also working on the privacy preserving surveillance project, where we are collecting the video data, and we are trying to block the one particular phase. So privacy preserving, we are just working on that. Okay, so there's a flexible sensor, so which the name says that flexibility. So this type of sensor, it measures the amount of deflection or bending. So generally, this type of sensor is stuck to the surface, and the resistance of this sensor is varied by bending the surface. So generally, these type of sensors, they're used in joysticks, computer peripherals, and yeah, especially it is used in all the applications where the whenever the resistance needs to be modified through bending. So this is something flexible. This is something flexible. It can be bent. So this also we have it in our lab. So flex sensor we call it. So it has got 2 pins. One pin is connected to the positive terminal of the power source, and we have another pin that is direct, that is also connected to the ground pin of the power source. So 2 pins are there. You can see here, pin 1 and pin 2. So positive, and this is ground. And also we are using it for one more purpose, like door opening and closing. So generally this, because we have a flexibility here, we can just bend it. So this sensor can be arranged at the edge of the door, and once the door opens, then this sensor also gets flexed, right? Because it bends. Now this is a bend sensor, so it can measure the amount of deflection. Based on that, we can easily find if the sensor bends, then the parameters available also automatically changes. So when the parameters automatically changes, then we already have a threshold value, which will help us to generate an alert when a door opens or closes. So especially we can just test it when we are having it in a window, right? So where a window can be opened and closed with this flexible sensor. So opening and closing, for that time it can be used. Also, in addition to that, we are also using it in joysticks, computer peripherals, and other places. So this is one type of sensors. Then, yeah, this is a light dependent sensor, which is for having a 5 millimeter high precision, right? And this has got CDS. CDS means cadmium. So we call it as the CAD, cadmium sulfides. So sorry for that, because I feel something happening here. Okay, so 2 cadmium sulfides photoconductive cells are available in this light dependent resistor, and it actually these spectral responses. If you look at the spectral responses of this light dependent sensor, okay, this will be mostly similar to a human eye, but the cell resistance falls with increasing light intensity. So especially when you keep this type of LDR sensors in the dark place, its resistance will be very high. Whereas if you keep it in the light place, the resistance will decrease. So with the so this is generally useful when we are having a room light. When we wanted to check the room light, if the room light is very dim, then we can just help the IoT device to turn on the lights. So for that, this LDR can be found, because the resistance will be very high when it is dark. Now, based on that, we can operate using a phone by connecting the IoT device to turn the lights on. So this can be helpful for such type of applications also. And ultrasonic, okay, this is something interesting. So it uses the transducer. So this type of ultrasonic sound waves, generally sound waves, so uses a transducer to send and receive ultrasonic pulses that relay back information about an object's proximity. Right. So high frequency sound waves, which is not even heard. I mean, we cannot hear as a human. We cannot hear that high frequency sound waves. So they reflect from boundaries to produce the distinct echo patterns. Right. So you can see this is what is the example, like we in a daily life you are seeing the bats. Bats generally transmit a very high ultrasound waves, and you can see this sound waves is reflected, it is touched on the object. So the echo patterns are transmitting back, which is indication to the bat that there is some object which is over there. So that is how it catches the prey, right? So that is how it catches the food for the bats, right? So the same technology, I mean, the same concept is what used in this technology. So especially in the sensors. So high frequency sound waves are transmitted. If there is any boundaries or some obstructions is there, it will be deflected and to produce back the echo patterns similarly. So one drawback of this type of ultrasonic sensors is that the temperature fluctuation, the environment temperature fluctuations, especially when it is very cool or when it is very hot, when the temperature is very hot, or when there is a deflection. So where temperature fluctuation will affect the speed of the ultrasonic sound waves that you travel. So that's why you can see you will not have the bats flying in the morning, especially after the sunlight has come, because the temperature is slightly increased. Whereas in the night time, the temperature is somewhat warmer or cool. So it's easy for them to transmit this type of sound waves. Otherwise, these sound waves will be affected by the temperature. So one drawback of the same thing also applies over here. So one drawback is the temperature fluctuation. It affects the speed of the ultrasonic sensor sound waves. So what happens as the temperature increases, the sound waves also travel faster and from the target. Right? So while the target may not be shifted, then it will seems that the sensor is actually giving some false positives. The target is slower or something. So for that reason also we can avoid using this sensors, especially when there is a temperature fluctuation. Otherwise, this is a good sensor, especially to find the closest object. Okay, so this LM35, which is linear monolithic, I said linear monolithic. So 35, which is a number, serial number for that model. So this is also the sensor which we use it. So if you even touch the sensor by hand, you can see there will be an increase in temperature. And if I remove my hand, then it will sense the environment temperature and shows me the result. So we can just monitor that. So this is a small sensor, which is temperature sensor, which is used for especially on the temperature, monitoring the temperature. Then we have a proximity sensor. So as I said, when this proximity sensors generally everyone is aware of, because these type of sensors are what used in our smartphones. When a user is calling or phone, you can see there is a display off automatically, because when you get close to your ears, right, so you can see the display gets turned off automatically. So that's because of this proximity sensor. So it detects when a user is holding the phone near the face, especially during a call, and turns off the display, right? So to prevent the keypad presses and battery consumption, everything, because these are all the devices, especially reliable, energy consumption devices. So by using this type of sensors, it generally tries to saves the energy as much as possible. So for that, these proximity sensors generally help. So how it works is actually it emits an electromagnetic field or a beam of electromagnetic radiation, a huge radiation, and looks for the changes in the field. Right? So if there is any change, then obviously this type of sensors can be easily detected. So one type of sensor that we use here is optical proximity sensor. So generally in all the Samsung smartphones from 2016 onwards, you can see this type of optimal proximity sensors being used, especially in the Samsung phones, which I've seen. So this also we have it in our lab. So then we have humidity sensor. So as I said, it just measures the water vapor in the air. So again, it's an electronic device that measures the humidity in its environment and converts it into a electrical signal. Okay, so this is accelerometer or magnetometer we call it. So this was useful for our VANET project where we wanted to monitor the vehicle speed. So what we did is we wanted to check the precision also. So in that case, only very plus or minus 0.5 only was the difference when we also run the another two-wheeler in parallel to check the speed of the vehicle. So this type of sensors are really good. You can also use it for the projects purpose. So this number is LSM90S1. So this is a magnetometer which we use it for acceleration, especially to find the speed of the vehicle. So these are all the different sensors that we are using it in our lab. So we'll just go in detail on one particular sensor, like how it actually works and how the data is extracted and what is the data it is displayed and how to read those data or how to parse the data. So we'll take an example for one sensor, which is a GPS sensor. Because in GPS sensor, we generally have two types of data. One is almanac data, we call it. Almanac data, ALMANAC. So almanac data, because this data that describes the orbital course of the satellite. So this type of data is valid only for 2 weeks or 1.5 weeks, maybe maximum for a month. But after this, not be valid, because generally we don't know what are the satellites that is orbiting around above the Earth's surface. So this type of data will actually give a detail on the satellites that were there before yesterday or day before yesterday. So those data is valid for some weeks. There is also one more data called ephemeris data. So ephemeris data, which is temporal or temporary data. So these two type of data is generally generated by the satellites, right? So every satellite will broadcast the almanac data, every satellite. And it includes a set of parameters. Okay, we'll see that in detail. So almanac data and ephemeris. So this is something for weeks. This is validity for weeks. And this is for hours. Only for a few hours this is valid. After that, we cannot use this data because it may not be correct. Because this type of data will also have the position of the satellite. Because this position of the satellite is very important when we are trying to calculate the accurate position of the object or user. Right. So GPS usage. So we know that GPS, actually we know there is a constellation of satellites that sends signals to the Earth's surface. There are many satellites that's revolving around the Earth, right? So basically, okay, so this location is within 1 to 10 meters, which means the accuracy of the GPS receiver that is written here is as within 1 to 10 meters. So this GPS receiver, like in your smartphone, it determines where you are up to this particular range, up to 10 to 10 meters. It's not giving an exact position, especially if in your smartphone, it tells you that you are in this particular latitude and longitude. It actually tells which is closer to 10 meters, plus or minus 10 meters. So it is actually measuring the arrival time of signals from 4 or more satellites. Right? And we are knowing that GPS is only used for finding the location of an object or a user. But in addition to that, in research, there are many articles you can find that the GPS receiver is also used for finding the, especially for the early prediction of the natural disasters. Because this GPS receivers, they not only get the signal from the satellites, but also from the bounced signals from the ground. So with respect to the bounced signals that they receive from the ground, they can also help in the natural disasters, especially on the earthquake detection, monitoring the volcano and all this. Based on the reflected GPS signals, they can also detect the probing the snow. Now you can see that measuring the water levels in the rice or paddy field, and measure the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere to predict the rains and water floods. So for all these, the GPS sensors are used. So as of now, we have known that GPS is only for location, but in addition to that, we can find many research articles, especially how this GPS is used in, for the other natural disaster predictions. Okay, so let's see like how this GPS works. So at any given point of time, we know that there are at least 24 active satellites. Now, 24, why I'm saying is that I'm talking about the higher end orbit, because we have low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and higher end orbit. So I'm talking about the higher Earth orbit. So at least 24 active satellites, which is orbiting equivalent to our Earth speed, because Earth is moving around 1,670 kilometers per hour, right, which is more than 1,000 miles per hour. So the same speed, there must be some satellites also revolving around our around the Earth, right? So for that, I'm saying at any given point of time, it is made like at least 24 satellites are orbiting around above Earth, which is 12,000 miles away from the Earth, right? And these positions of the satellites, the positions of all the satellites are constructed in such a way that your location will contain, if you're in Earth's location anywhere, right, you'll be having at least 12 satellites, right? The primary purpose of the 12 satellites is to transmit the information back to Earth over a radio frequency of range, I think 1.5 gigahertz around. Yeah, 1.5 gigahertz around, you'll be able to transmit your information. So with that information and some mathematics, a ground-based receiver, this GPS receiver, will be able to calculate its position and time, right? So let's see an example here. So here you can see in this example, every smartphone, at least they require 4 satellites, 4 satellite data, right? So 4 satellites to calculate their position. Only if the 4 satellites are there above the Earth's surface, then they can calculate it. So out of these 4 satellites, 1 satellite is used only for synchronizing time between the clocks in receiver and satellites, receiver and the satellites. Other 3 are for other purpose. Let's see an example here. So suppose if you are at distance x from satellite 1, right? You may be present anywhere in the first circle, right? So anywhere in this first circle, you may be present, right? Your distance 1 from satellite 1. Suppose we'll assume this satellite 1, and this is satellite 2, and this is satellite 3, and this is satellite 4, which this 4th satellite is only for time synchronization between the clocks, because we're using atomic clocks in the satellite as well as in the receiver. So this helps in synchronizing to this. And we have to assume all the satellites are moving, right? It's not something stationary. It is all moving. And our Earth is also moving. So it is moving according to the Earth's speed. So in that case, the relative is 0. So if you're having distance 1 from the, you'll be anywhere in the circle. Then suppose if you're at distance from satellite 2, then you'll be anywhere around here and here, right? At any of these points, you must be here. Then suppose if you're distance from the 3rd satellite, then we can obviously say there is an intersection point where we'll be here. So based on this reason, based on this concept, right, they are able to find your latitude and longitude. So this is what we call it as the trilateration principle. So trilateration principle we call it. But we all know how to use a triangulation, which we are studying in basic mathematics. Right? So to calculate the distance to an object using 2 reference points. So that's a triangulation principle. But in trilateration, what we do is, especially with the GPS, we need to determine 4 values: latitude, longitude, elevation, and time. So we compute all this using multiple reference points. So that is what is actually here. So once we found that, then we try to put a lock. So this is actually, we call it as the trilateration principle. Also, we have time to first fix, we call it TFF, which means that time to first fix. So time it takes after powering on, because generally when you turn on the receiver, it will not immediately give you the, it will not give you the data. So it takes time. So that time, immediately after you power on, So accurately computing a position and using these 4 satellites. So that time we call it as the time to first fix. But once you fixed, then it is completely locked, right? So your position is locked. But if you are not in the good view of the sky, if you are staying inside your home and then you try to look for a GPS receiver, it may not work. And suppose if you wanted to have a GPS receiver outside, then you have to move. We should have a clear sky. So we generally need to have a very good expensive GPS devices, because what we are doing is not that much expensive. If you have expensive, then it will give you a centimeter accuracy. So this is one example like how the GPS data looks like. So we can see here. So it is displayed in a different message formats usually. So different, but generally they follow this NMEA. We call it so NMEA. So NMEA means National Marine Electronics Association. So it is National Marine Electronics Association. So there is a standards message format which is being there. So nearly all the GPS receivers, they output this NMEA data. So NMEA standard also we call it. So generally these data are generally formatted in lines of sentences. These are all sentences we call lines of sentences, right? And each sentence contains some various bits. So here we are writing it for for clarity. But generally it will be in bits and it will be comma separated values, right? So you can see that here. So GP means global positioning. RMC is one type of message format. So GP is global positioning and GG is one type of message format. Like that we have GBS, LLR. So there are almost more than 20 to 25 message formats we have in GP, global position. Right. So if you see the first part, so this indicates the time 23:53:17 seconds. So 11:53 p.m. night time. They have the time is given here, and this is something called latitude, and this is something called north direction, and this is longitude, and this is something called direction west. So latitude, northwest direction, so latitude and longitude. And I think this is number of satellites, because how many number of satellites are as taken as a multiple reference points, and these are all the meters. What is the distance in meters they have given, right? And this is something a checksum. Whenever you encounter a star here, it means a checksum format. Any message format concern, whenever you encounter a star, it means a checksum. So that is actually to find the whether the data is received in a correct way or not, whether it has been any bit error is happening or not. So that we are using this type of GPS message format. So okay, so what we try to do is generally we used to parse this data and then we extract the relevant information for our decision making. So we also use a library called TinyGP, Tiny GPS++, Tiny GPS++, which is an Arduino library for parsing such type of NMEA data streams provided by the GPS models, because the GPS models will have this type of NMEA standard data. So to parse that NMEA data streams, we use this Tiny GPS++ Arduino library. Okay. So coming to the precision point, accuracy, right? So how accurate is GPS is one question. So whether we have a very good GPS receiver or not. So what we have it in our lab is something not expensive. It is somewhat cheaper. So that's why we can always find there are some challenges, especially when there is a clear sky, it works. When there is no clear sky, it's not working. And when there is a moving, the signal does not turn on immediately. So there is some lag in the initial setup. And also we also notice some errors like plus or minus some 5 to 10 meters, right? So these are all the challenges, especially when you're buying some low cost GPS receivers, especially when you wanted to execute the projects, right? So for that, if you really wanted to have a very good accuracy, as to centimeter accuracy, we should have a differential GPS. So this is also another type of GPS receiver. They have additional antenna that receives signals not only from the satellites, also from the ground stations. So that's the advantage here. So that's why from the satellite and from the ground station, we are getting close to the centimeter accuracy. Whereas the others, they are not close to the centimeter accuracy. But this is something costly also. It is expensive. It is something expensive. So which is so precise is expensive, and these are all not that much expensive. And this is something Gagan we call it, GAGAN. So this is actually our Indian satellite actually. So we call it as a Gagan. So like Japanese system, they use MSAERS, and for European they use EGNAS, and for North America they use WAAS, which is we call it as the Wide Area Augmentation System. Similarly, in India we use this Gagan, which is the GPS aided, geo augmented navigation. So this type of navigation is used actually. It is actually an implementation of regional satellite-based augmentation system by our government of India, and this is used in our military. Yeah, in our military, especially in the airspace, they are used because it improves the accuracy of the GNS receiver by providing reference signals. So especially in the surveillance and air traffic management over Indian airspace, this type of Gagan systems are used. This is based on the wide area augmentation system. So you can see again, this also accuracy is close to 2.5 meters. So differential GPS, this is really expensive, is used in the centimeter accuracies. If it's so critical, then we have to look for this expensive. If you're okay with plus or minus, then it's reasonable, then we can get it close to this. Suppose you want to have a target hitting from the drone, which is something flying around somewhere, some miles away from the Earth's surface, then we should have something called a centimeter accuracy, and then we can achieve the target. Otherwise, it will be challenging here. So differential GPS are generally used in such type of applications. Next one. Okay, so protocol layers. So far we've seen sensors, what are the sensors used, and how the sensor message formats and everything. And again, these sensors needs to exchange their data, right? So all these sensor devices must exchange the data. For exchanging the data, there must be some set of rules for communication. So that rules we call it as the protocol. So if you look at the protocol perspective, there are many protocols. This session will not be enough, but there are many protocols developed for different type of applications, because sensors are not specific to one application. You have mobile ad hoc network, your vehicular ad hoc network, flying ad hoc network, underwater wireless sensor network. So different types of networks are there. And for each network, the protocol also changes. We cannot say this is a standard protocol for all the type of networks. So depending upon the application requirements, it changes. Also within a one particular network, the protocols will change. Suppose I say VANET, vehicle ad hoc network. For one particular situation, I would say the AODV protocol is good. But for another situation, this AODV will not be working good. So I have to have a modified versions of AODV. So according to the situation in a particular network, the protocol performance also changes. So accordingly, the protocols have to be developed. So that's why the research is completely focused on the protocols, because there is no generalized or the perfect solution that exists in any layers, whether it's a MAC layer or routing layer or transport layer concern. What are the layers that we're talking about? We don't have a specific, correct protocol, reliable protocol for the communication, right? So what is the challenge here is because if I develop a protocol for traditional wireless sensor network, can I apply this protocol for underwater wireless sensor network? Of course, I cannot apply, because the challenges are slightly different. Because in underwater wireless is totally different from the environment perspective, so that the traditional protocols that we talk about whatever the proactive or reactive or whatever it is not applicable for underwater wireless sensor networks. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible, but in between there was a break, voice break, but now it's fine now.
Okay, thank you. I think, okay. This is a message is called interconnection is unstable. Okay, so for any project, IoT implementation, so these are the components that is required. Right? So sensors, networks, standards, intelligent actions, intelligent analysis. So these are all the general components of IoT implementation. Right? So we'll look only from the sensors perspective. This network standards, intelligent. So there are challenges also available in other components, but we are getting only into the sensors, and we're specific to the protocols. So again, in challenges in sensor, power consumption. Right? So we cannot rely a power supply if we deploy a sensor in underwater, or if you deploy a sensor in agriculture field. Constant power supply is very challenging. So whenever we wanted to write a protocol, then we also need to have energy efficiency as one parameter. So like this, I mean, you can see there are many papers published: energy routing protocol, energy efficient routing protocol, low adaptive energy efficient, so LEADs. Like there are many protocols which has been provided because the application requires such type of such type of challenges to be satisfied. So one challenge is the power consumption. So obviously, in any protocol design that we look at, either it's routing or the MAC layer protocol, we need to focus on the energy efficiency part also. We also need to have energy efficiency as an additional consideration. And security, of course, because when we try to have a device communication, these devices always transmit some data, whether it's a structured or unstructured data, doesn't matter. But this data should not reveal any private information or some confidential or secret information. So security is also an important challenge, especially when we are transmitting the data, because all the sensor devices, mostly when we talk about, it's all connected in the wireless network. An attacker who is already into the wireless network, he can easily sniff the data using the open source tools that we have. So when he is able to read the data, then obviously it could be easy that he could get additional information about the data. For that reason only they are trying to encrypt, but again, encryption and decryption, doing in sensor devices computationally very costlier. Again, if you come up with a solution saying that no need RSA, use elliptical cryptography. Again, but practically you have seen that even in a smartphone, when we try to implement the elliptical cryptography and other protocols, we are seeing the difference, that encryption operation, how much time it consumes, and decryption, how much time it consumes. So security perspective also, from this, from sensor perspective also, security is one thing that is challenging from the research perspective. And interoperability, which is also very important, because one, we have a data from the sensor device, we try to exchange the data with another device. On that device must be interoperable with that. If that follows a different format and transmitting the data and then sending to the final sync or the receiver part, it's again a challenge. It's again a hectic, right? So these three are the important challenges in sensors, and that theme is also from the research perspective is converting into protocols. So this is general protocol stack. We can see that COAP, JSON is JavaScript object rotation. This is a type of data which is easy to read, especially when you are trying to use the IoT devices. And COAP is actually a lightweight version of HTTP. So if suppose HTTPs have got some 7 to 8 messages, request, reply, and all this, it has got only some 3 to 4 messages. So it's a lightweight version of HTTP. So again, the name is only changed. So here, because a TCP will be difficult when you are trying to have a communication between the sensor devices, establishing a connection and then holding the connection for long. So generally they prefer the UDP. And again, devices are given an IP version 6 address also being there. The network layer, ZigBee and 802.11p WANET, all the other wireless 11 versions is also used in the physical layer. Okay, so from the perspective. So it follows the OSI model. So three cross-layer management planes we have. One is the task plane, mobility plane, and power plane. So if you look at the mobility plane, which is a management plane, it detects the sensor node movements, right? So node can keep track of neighbors and power levels, right? So for power balancing, and especially in the task management plane, we can schedule the sensing tasks to a given area, right? So we can determine which nodes are off and which nodes are on. So all this can be easily determined in the task. So we divide this into three different planes: a task plane, mobility plane, and power management plane. So from the transport layer perspective, uh, there are two types of transport protocols. One is packet driven and another one is event driven. So packet driven, all the packets are sent by source and reaches the destination. In event driven, the event must be detected, right? But it is enough that one notification message reaches the sink. But any accident happened, so that event must be detected and then reach to the appropriate roadside unit. So which takes care of broadcasting to a multiple vehicles in the road. Right? Whereas in the packet driven, all packets sent by source must reach the destination. So that's what is the packet. So this is how there are many protocols, transport protocols available. So all this fit into these two categories, only small changes that they have in their design perspective. So from the upstream perspective, node to sink. Right? So sensor source node to sink. So there is a protocol called sensor transmission control protocol. So there's something standard protocol which is used, especially in upstream. And in the downstream, we also use the price-oriented reliable transport protocol. So why we call price-oriented? Because there is a congestion possible. So whenever there is a congestion happening, then we try to increase the cost of communication. So whenever the communication cost is increased, then we can understand that the reporting rate for the sender has to be decreased. The sending rate of the sender has to be decreased. Right. So the sink also adjusts the reporting rate according to the price of the node. So that's why they call it as a price-oriented reliable transport protocol. And then we have pump slow, fetch quick. What we pump actually here is we pump has got two timers. One is minimum time and maximum time, where the node waits for minimum time before transmission and recovers all the missing packets and removes the redundant broadcast. Because the redundancy is one thing which we need to be careful in designing, because the flooding, all this actually causes too much overhead, and it also consumes the energy, which means that the transmission energy is comparatively less than this flooding part. So when we are trying to pump, right, so we need also wait for the maximum time if there are any packets or multiple packets lost. That is, for that reason we use pump slowly. And fetch, why we do is because we request a retransmission in the fetch for the missing packets from neighbor. So that we try to do immediately. So whenever any packet is lost, we go for retransmission, right? Request for retransmission for the missing packets. So that needs to be done quickly. Pumping slow is to avoid the congestion or to avoid the loss in future. So we try to recover the missing packets and remove the redundant broadcast. This is how it happens in the downstream. So these are some standard protocols, the transport layer protocols, in addition to TCP and UDP, which we are already familiar with. So as I said, the TCP is not suitable because we need to have a hop-ahead reliability, which is more energy efficient than end-to-end. So to provide reliability and congestion avoidance. So network layer, so where many research papers you can find, either it's a body area networks or public safety networks, delayed order networks, all the types of networks you can find this type of routing protocols. So if you look at the routing protocols, there are basically four in the ad hoc networks: proactive, reactive, hybrid, and location. So this is what is the standard that we have taught to students also. So all the other protocols are also only the modifications in any of this existing protocols. Right? So, okay, there is a question. Varsha K. Patil. Can I take the question now or in the end of the session? Somebody has raised a hand. Got a message here. So Varsha, you have question? You may please. Or I'm not able to hear your voice. Okay, I think mistakenly they've done. Right. Okay, so from the routing protocols perspective, there are only 4 types that we have known in the ad hoc networks: proactive, reactive, and hybrid, and location. Right. So now if you take wearable sensor networks, we need to check whether proactive will be suitable or reactive will be suitable on hybrid or location. Right? Because if a wearable sensor networks we are constrained, suppose a patient is wearing a wearable sensor device, right? So that wearable sensor device which the patient is wearing in a wristwatch has to transmit the data to the nearby access points, and it should do it continuously so that it keeps updating to the doctor who is monitoring it. And obviously there will be a threshold value which will alert the doctor by message or by alarm or something, right? So for such type of scenario, which routing protocol will be better? So because the frequent node disconnections and reconnections will be there. The patient might be walking in a hospital from one place to one floor to another floor, or he may leave the hospital and he may go from that place to the home, and then again from office he may work. So there could be a frequent node disconnections and reconnections in that device, because every time when they try to move, the access point connection will be lost and they have to get connected to a new access point. So like this, it keeps changing. Also, if you're using a mobile station or cellular towers, again, there'll be a hop over, right? So there is a possibility for frequent node disconnections and reconnections in the current scenario. So in such cases, what are the algorithms that we studied, proactive, reactive, hybrid, and location aware, whether this will be suitable or not. So proactive algorithms, we know what is meant by proactive. So where each node will maintain up-to-date routing table by querying the neighbors, right? So like DSDV, OLSR. So these are all the proactive routing protocols. I'm not getting in detail of how this works. We can just take the help of tutorials. This is the basic concept. So proactive, it continuously exchange information, right? So to keep updated. It is good in case of victims evacuation or rescue mission concern. This is good. This protocol seems to be good. But when you look at in terms of resource perspective, whether bandwidth utilization or battery lifetime perspective, it is completely bad. So this proactive type of protocols will not be suitable, especially for this type of wearable sensor devices. Okay, so then we will reactive type of protocols, because reactive means on demand, on the fly. I try to establish the route and I get the send the data, because again I do it by flooding. Because flooding is actually again a battery consumption one, but yeah, but initial latency also will be there to communicate and delay the network level, right? So in that case, this reactive also may not be appropriate for critical and rescue context. Then for public safety networks, an ad hoc cognitive radio may be used, right? So especially spectrum can be used. So cognitive radio based spectrum aware routing protocol could be used. So where they try to replace the white spaces in the spectrum, the television white spaces, because the television spectrum is not using some of the white spaces. So that spaces are generally utilized. And even in the few years before, you can just see the scheme which is introduced by Google to create the 4G connection. I mean, not 4G, the net connections to the rural places by occupying the white spaces, television white spaces in the spectrum. So that is also one type of projects was going on. So it looks like then what is going to be the suitable one? So what suitable is like hybrid. So that's why you can see many of the papers, the hybrid type of protocols where mixture of proactive and reactive is used generally for this type of research perspective, right? So especially for the wearable sensor devices. Also the location, which location they are available. Okay, so routing the protocols perspective, the hierarchy is, the hierarchy of proactive, reactive, and hybrid is not changed. Only thing is for the different applications, it may slightly change. So we also have data-centric routing protocols, because nowadays That's what we are trying to move again, because the Indian architecture that we are discussing about is something data centric. So yeah, so underwater wireless sensor network is an example where we used in our project for Indian architecture. So there are some protocols, sensor protocol for information via negotiation, spin, and directed fission, gossiping, flooding. So all these protocols, generally they try to mimic the behaviors of the proactive and reactive. Right? So flooding is part of the reactive because initially they have to do the flooding. So one difference is there, but flooding and gossiping. So flooding actually sends the packet, broadcasts the packet to everyone. So every neighbor gets the same packet. So it's a duplicate. Whereas the gossiping, it will be specific to one particular neighbor. So he selects a neighbor and then he gossips just that particular neighbor alone, and he gossips to another. So finally, he reaches the destination. That's another type of doing it. So finding the neighbor again, that is different parameters they use. So this is one project that we worked on, an underwater wireless sensor networks, where we use the sensor device communication. So these are all the nodes which are below the water, and these are all the buoyants, we call it buoys, which are on the surface of the water. And user wants to get access to the sensors. This could be a temperature sensor, this could be a pressure sensor. So he wants to monitor the temperature or pressure sensors. So for that, what we did is, because it's a content centric, so we try to move, get the data from the nearest locations. Not every time we get the data from the sensors. These sensors will to the nearby buoys or submarines, which actually floats on the surface of the water, and this keeps updating it. So we are maintaining 3 tables in the Indian architecture. One is content store, pending interest table, and forwarding information base. So each and every node maintains these 3 tables. The sensor, buoyants nodes, all the nodes maintain these 3 tables. So whenever the entry is new, then it gets added in the pending interest and then forwards it to the next stop. The phase interface indicates the interface. So which interface it actually transmitted, because a device may have multiple interfaces. So to which interface it has got transmitted, that will be notified here. So you can see there is no IP address involved in this Indian architecture. All these nodes are not identified by IP address. Instead, they are having some names, ocean sensor. So they just get access by like this path. So that's something new in this Indian architecture which we experienced. And coming to the MAC layer, again, there are different protocols available in MAC. There are the data link layer. Again, the convention, what we know is time division, multiple access, and CSMA. So those are all the standard protocols. That is also applicable for the other wireless networks, but there will be small changes. For example, if you look at the VANET, we're using EDCA, Enhanced Distribution Channel Access Control. So EDCA algorithm, so which is actually a modification of the CSMA-CA. So carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance. So here we are giving some priority to some traffic packets. That way this gets slightly improved results that we get it using the EDCA. So small modifications that we do. Again, in the underwater, if you see, the traditional network cannot be used. Traditional MAC protocols cannot be used because it's a challenging environment. Right? And the physical layer, so you can see there are the different interfaces where we used to have for sensor to sensor communication. So sensor device communication can happen in the ZigBee mode or wireless network. P stands for the wireless network VANET. N stands for the wireless, the 2.4 gigahertz ISM band. So all this are being used in the physical layer. So what are the sensors that we use in applications? Okay, so before the COVID-19, we see that there are sensors we have seen in our day-to-day life in these places, right? So in every house, fridge, surveillance, washing machine, vehicle, water tank, everywhere we have seen this, right? But after COVID-19, you can see now most of the houses, we are having the oxygen level sensor, heart rate sensor, blood pressure sensor. So many hospitals running in every home, most of the places. So that's how it is. So The importance of medical field. Now, this is from the one paper, recent paper, which is published in this ACS Nano. I can see here the source. So I just listed the figure from that particular paper, recent paper. So what they're trying to say is that with more than 20,000 diseases, so the doctors are completely overwhelmed, and only 3% of them are satisfied with existing research tools. So actually, therefore, they are facing an impossible challenge of correctly detecting and effectively treating the health conditions before they become symptomatic, because of the lack of effective, reliable, and affordable real-time monitoring tools. So this challenge becomes even more pressing in the light of the increasing elder population and healthcare costs, skyrocketing healthcare costs, and the prevalence of chronic diseases. Right. So due to the limited ability of conventional methods and limited perspective of human diagnostics, patients are often diagnosed incorrectly or at a later stage as their disease condition progresses. So this is what happens in that. So obviously, what they are saying in this paper is they wanted to have an integration of nanotechnology in the sensors, especially on the biomedical sensors, and the integration of nanotechnology, biomedical sensors, and artificial intelligence for advanced clinical decision support systems, so that this type of inaccuracies are completely overwhelmed, even if the sensors are reporting some incorrect data. So that's the type of applications one where majorly we can find. So ongoing in the medical seasons, so sensor data fusion. So medical sensors, we know generally it converts the biomedical parameters into easily measured signals and plays a particularly important role in medical technologies. And data fusion and data aggregation plays a vital role, especially when we deploy the sensors in the remote field. The aggregation point is important when you're collecting the data, because it has to filter the unwanted data, noises, everything, and then purify the data. Similarly, in data fusion, how the collected data is helping in making the decision is also more important. So it's an emerging technology in various domains. So pulse rate, respiration rate, blood pressure, body temperature. Sometimes even sometimes you can also include your SpO2, glucose level. All must be combined in early stage, and then it should facilitate the doctor to monitor the health conditions. Right. So this approach is primarily used for critical care, and it is less suitable for everyday monitoring of a person's health. And remote data sensing, which is especially achieved by the proximity sensors, so that the infection is something avoided by avoid touching the patients and then giving the treatments. So, but remote radar sensing, again, from the research perspective, in 75 to 77 megahertz, they tried with the microwave radar, but that was not sufficient. So they tried to increase the frequency to 8 gigahertz. Just imagine this frequency, 8 gigahertz with a single transceiver. And now they're able to detect the respiration of a person sitting in front of the radar with high accuracy. So this much high frequency radiation must be exposed to the person to get it. But that anyhow, they maintain some 1 meter distance, the device and the patient. So data analytics model, so healthcare. So yeah, the gathered data based on the time factor and frequency domain. So they have split both on the time and the frequency, and the data loss, right? So, and the error must be processed before transmitting the data. So you can see the data error. So all this must be pre-processed before we transmit to the, before give it as input to train the any machine learning model. So wearable sensor, now it's a prominent technology application we can call, that senses and gathers information from user for analyzing any physiological changes. So data analytics model, okay, this is what is. So smart farming also, we can see some use of sensors. So one important challenge is that energy efficiency. So how to increase the lifetime of underwater sensor battery? So because that seems to be an important place, especially if you are keeping the sensor device in the under the water. There are two parts. there are two possibilities. We don't have the provision to charge that particular device, because the sunlight is also not exposed to that particular sensor device. We cannot use any solar energy, and also it's very difficult to change the battery, right, because it's under the water. So having these conditions, for how they are trying to overcome by increasing the lifetime of the underwater sensor battery. So what type of solutions they have generally? So one solution is either they save energy in hardware and solution, which means that in hardware there's some kind of optimization do, and in solution means the software that they develop, they look the appropriate time complexity part to be reduced, so that it is not having much complex when it is doing some computation or processing. And use sleep and wake up mode. So only when it is sensing and data transmitting, it will be wake up mode. Otherwise, it goes to the sleep mode to save the energy. And use chemistry and mechanical methods to generate energy by itself. So which it can generate, because there is a generally placed below the ocean. So there will be some type of a wobbling or some type of a movement in the waves. So from that, whether it is able to generate energy by itself, not from the solar energy. So that's what is actually chemistry and mechanical methods. Or they can use the lithium ion instead of nickel and cadmium, so which they can have more lifetime. Or use balloon to come above water, because suppose if the sensor device energy is coming down, then there is a program which is written in the device to say that it is going below this level 50% or 20%, then balloon will be opened and it will come above on top of the water, charge, and then again after reaching the particular level, the balloon will go off and then it comes down to the water. So this is also one type of solution that is generally used to charge the battery. Okay, so coming back to the same starting slide. So suppose if I wanted to deploy sensors here, the same place, we can find many sensors to be placed, right? So dirt sensors, humidity sensors, temperature sensors, and also to look at the health of all the people who are working on this, right? So whether the health is deteriorating or it is constantly improving. So many types of sensors we can place in this picture itself. Right? So that shows the importance of sensors, and it becomes like the number of sensors is more than the number of persons in a home. And if you take a count in the number of persons in a home in a ration card, you can find more number of sensor devices than the number of persons in a home. So that much prominence have become in the every day-to-day life that we have. So yeah, so to summarize, so sensors must be reliable, energy efficient, and high accuracy. So these three are the important things that need to be considered when we are trying to purchase a sensor and when we are trying to utilize the sensor for the experience perspective. And from the sensor communication perspective, between sensor to sensor or sensor to any other device concerned, we're trying to establish the communication. From the protocol perspective, so it depends completely on the applications. So change is only in the lower layers, not in the higher layers. And still the research is going on in the MAC and network layer. Okay, so I stop here. Any questions?
Any questions from the participants? Sir, I think there is a question in the chat box.
Yeah. Yeah, for such type of situations, we can use the differential GPS, because for getting signals from the satellites, it's difficult, right? Because we need to have a clear sky and other purpose. But we can have the signals that bouncing off from the ground. So we can think of having a differential GPS receiver, especially inside the tunnel, for a very good accuracy concern. Okay, so how we implement this all and how we connect to computer. I think the next section, along with my research scholar, Sarath Babu, I'll be telling that. So he'll be able to demonstrate practically like how we are replacing those sensor devices, getting connected to the Raspberry Pi device, and then how we are able to monitor in the laptop, right? And all these things will be discussed in that session. So we'll just take few, we are just given, taken some few sensors that we are using in the lab and how it can be established communication between the devices. Not only sensor to sensor, even sensor to any device concern. Yeah, thank you, Shankar. Anything else?
Yeah, I guess Arun sir, it's fine. I guess. Thank you so much for the session, starting from very basics of sensors and protocols, and then completing up to data analytics parts. That is great session, sir. And I hope we can meet maybe by 2:30, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Dr.
Thank you.
Vikas.
Thank you.
Thank
Sir.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah. Sebin, Dr. Miss Sebin.
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. You can go.
So thank you all. The second session is over. I have posted the attendance link in the chat box. You are requested to mark your attendance using the Google form. Okay. So we are having a lunch break from 1:30 to 2:30, and we will begin our third session by 2:30 p.m. Thank you all.